All right, there we go. Hello everyone, how's it going? Team here, and this is BxJS Weekly, episode 114, bringing you all the best JavaScript news of the week in a podcast form. And yeah, we do have quite a few things to discuss today. So as usual, the first section of the week is getting started, and we got 5 tutorials here. Hi, not a number is a number. Welcome to the stream. All right, so getting started, the first thing we got here today is a React Cool Portal. What is it and how to use it? Nice brief introduction to the React portals in general and to the React Cool Portal, which is one specific library that allows you to use portals. So if you are just starting with React and you never heard about the portals concept and you were wondering what it is and how to use it, do check this one out. It's a really good introduction. Next article we got here is 67 weird debugging tricks your browser doesn't want you to know. A quite amusing title, but really a great article. There's a lot of different techniques and approaches that I honestly didn't know, like half of them probably. There's some really cool things like the logging points and trace points. I remember reading about that at some point that was added like in Chrome, version 73 or something. And then I completely forgot that they existed, but it is just such a cool thing that basically allows you to create a log point that will console log something within the code without actually adding that console log in your code or, in third-party code if you're debugging an existing website, which is really neat. And there's like a bunch of them here. So there's like a ton of tips and tricks. So if you are into debugging, and you should be, then do check this article out. You will likely find something really good here. All right. Next thing we got here is the Deno Handbook, a concise introduction to Deno. Deno 1.0 was just released this week. We're going to talk about it a bit later in the releases section, but this is essentially a handbook that covers just about everything you have to know about Deno, like with tons of examples, tons of things that it talks about, the security, the bundling, the installation, whatever you can imagine. Everything is here. You can also download it as PDF, EPUB, or MOBI if you want to. So a perfect thing to start with Deno. If you were interested, do check this one out. It's actually pretty great. All right. Next thing we got here is building native desktop apps with React Node GUI. So this is the tutorial that teaches you how to build a very basic React Node GUI app. If you never heard about React Node GUI, it's essentially a bindings for native UI in Node that allows you to build native apps by just using Node.js, which, obviously there's like some limitations and caveats here, but it's actually pretty good. So if you were looking to do something like this, do check this one out. It's a pretty good tutorial that will guide you through building a pretty simple app. And yeah, maybe this is what you were looking for. And the last thing we got here for today in the getting started section is building a Jest clone, or rather, I guess, a simplistic test runner is what it probably should say. So it's not exactly a Jest clone, as Jest comprises of quite a ton of different features, and this just dives into, well, what testing is and how does the test runner works. Nonetheless, it's a really good article. So if you are just getting started with testing and you didn't really know, what the test runners are, how do they work, how do you build one yourself, then, well, building one yourself will answer quite a lot of questions and will explain how exactly the Jest runs the tests. So there's pretty basic assertions, pretty basic test running. That's about it. Obviously, no snapshots or anything crazy like that, but it is a very good introduction and very good way to figure out what test runners are and how exactly do they work. Okay, that is it for the getting started section. Now we get to the articles and news, and oh boy, do we have some stuff to discuss here. So the first one here is from the web.dev website from the Google team. It's called Improved Next.js and Gatsby Page Load Performance with Granular Chunking. So this is essentially kind of like a tutorial, but a more advanced one. What it talks about is that typically when you build a Next.js and Gatsby websites, they try to split the code into common bundles and page bundles, specific ones that basically are the common ones are loaded on all pages, and then the page-specific ones are loaded only on one page, which is supposed to reduce the loading times and supposed to reuse as much code as possible, right? The problem is that's not always the case. So there are sometimes cases when there's the bundle is extracted into common bundles, even though it is not used enough in specific pages to justify extracting it, right? So this article talks about improving the chunking by giving it better, by basically modifying the config to make it better for your specific case. Like in this example case, when they have the module C that is extracted into comments, even though it's only used in 2 different pages, they talk about, okay, so we're actually going to say that minimum chunks is, if there's pages, more than 2 pages, then we're going to use that. Otherwise, we're just going to fall back to the default value. It's a pretty good write-up. Essentially, it's a deep dive into chunking and how you can fine-tune it in your specific app to make sure that you actually get, smaller JS bundles, faster load times, and so on and so forth. They did that. They tried that essentially for some existing websites, and yeah, in some cases the changes are just mind-blowing. Like 71% difference in just by changing essentially some config settings, which is kind of awesome. Do the same thing for Gatsby, so they also explain how do you do that in Gatsby and show the results there. Not as drastic as for Next.js, I guess, because Gatsby is static mostly, so it's kind of expected, I guess, but still quite some improvements, up to like 30% or something. If you are working with Next and Gatsby, or maybe just Webpack and wanted to learn more about granular chunking, then do check this one out. It's actually a really, really good write-up. All right, next article we got here is comparing Ember, Octane, and React. This is a really big one. Like, it's a really, really big article. It is, the caveat here is it's written by one of the core team members of Ember, but it does a very good job of comparing Ember, Octane, and React with the latest React Hooks API. So, I wouldn't go through the whole thing. There's like a lot of, full, like pretty basic but complete React app, and pretty basic but complete Ember app that does exactly the same. And then the author here goes into basically comparison. So first of all, there's a walkthrough of code that explains what each bit does for both React and Ember, which I found pretty cool. As someone who's familiar with React, is like, I guess React is not so interesting for me, but the Ember part was very interesting to look at. And it does look pretty neat. Like, I'm not sure why I haven't tried Ember up to this point. Maybe we should do a stream on that, because the Ember Octane looks pretty damn nice. Object-oriented sides aside, which, as you might know, I'm not exactly a fan of heavy object-oriented programming with like classes and decorators and all that kind of stuff. But it does look very cool, so might be interesting to give it a shot. Again, first the walkthrough of the code, and then in-depth comparison of the differences, and takes away from each side, like, hooks have great composability, but they are actually overly granular, which I personally don't really agree with that, but, that's a sort of personal opinion here. And yeah, it's a very interesting comparison, very in-depth, obviously biased towards the Ember framework since the author is on the Ember core team, but it's a pretty fair comparison, and there is a lot of interesting thoughts here. So if you are, if you're maybe evaluating Ember versus React, or you're wondering about React coming from the world of Ember or the other way around, do give it a read through. It's a great article and a really good write-up. Basically describes the things and compares them in a pretty nice manner. Obviously opinionated, as I already said multiple times, but you cannot really get anywhere without opinionating stuff when discussing technologies, especially so if you're working on one of them. All right. Okay, so yeah, here's the deal. We got 2 more articles, and they are discussing the state of the modern web. Hey, Smarterbrot, welcome to the stream. Right, so back to the articles. 2 articles that discuss modern web. One of them is from Tom McWright, who is working on the Mapbox, I believe, and now as well the Observable HQ. And he's sort of arguing that, that the whole single page applications are overused. We use too much JavaScript and all that kind of stuff that you typically hear. Now, here's the kind of interesting bit about it. Most of his points here during the article are actually valid. Like, there's a lot of valid concerns. There's a lot of valid observations here. The stuff like, React has a very specific use case, and sometimes people pick it and use it for things that don't actually need React, which is a perfectly fair point. Like, if you take Gatsby and you build a purely static website, that's probably not really a good idea, right? Because Gatsby does add a lot of overhead by bringing in React and not just compiling the pages, but it also includes React to make them dynamic, right? So if you don't need any of those dynamic parts, then why the hell are you using Gatsby? There's better ways of doing it completely static way that won't add this React overhead, which is a perfectly reasonable thing to say, right? There is arguments about the bundle splitting. There's some, well, kind of exaggerated cases of, like, you know, imagine person opened your code split bundle, loaded the page, and then left that page in the browser for a week, and then came back to the app a week later, and he still uses that old downloaded bundle, which is not updated. Like, there's obviously ways around that, but they are not that often discussed, which is completely true. And yeah, so there's, like, basically there's a ton of valid points here. But I think the conclusion of this article, so I tend to agree here with Rich Harris, who wrote the counterpiece that's called In Defense of the Modern Web. I think that the conclusion of the article is kind of not quite, I mean, I guess, you know, the article, the interesting thing is that the article is not called Single Page Application Fatigue, but the title, like the link is. So it seems like the author just got, I don't know, like maybe has some grudge against this single page apps, or maybe just got really fatigued with all the frameworks and tools and everything that's out there. And it's true, there's a lot of them, right? It's kind of overwhelming. But the thing is, so I'm more of on the side of a Rich Harris here with this second article in the defense of modern web that talks, yes, indeed, there's valid points and there's stuff that has to be addressed. And the hydration stuff is like, yes, there's problems with that. But they exist not just within, you know, they're not React specific. They exist across all the frameworks that have to do stuff like, you know, render something on the server and then make it interactive. That's not React specific. And yeah, it's like, so Rich Harris essentially argues here that in the long run, this is the right way of doing it. It's just we're not kind of there. It's going to take us more time to figure out how to correctly do all of that and tackle this with, you know, doing the server-side rendering with single-page apps, and then correctly doing the updates, doing the data fetching and whatever. And some of the upcoming frameworks is going to nail it. I'm honestly personally on this bandwagon as well. So I think that the work that's been done in the past years by Gatsby, by Next, by Svelte, by Sapper, by all these new fancy frameworks is actually incredible. Like, it literally allows you to use the same code on server and on client, and then serve your pages pre-rendered and then enrich them with a, you know, complex functionality on the fly, so that user actually doesn't have to, you know, wait for ages to start reading, for example, and then he can interact with the page whenever he wants to. Which is awesome. And yes, we're definitely not quite there yet, but I personally think that this is the way to go. And so one of the points in the original article was that we need better separation of concerns, as in, you know, you don't want to use React for blog, and then for shopping cart, and then the crude app, and then the fancy single page app that has a complex structure, right? While Rich Harris here argues that you actually do want one framework that covers all of those cases, but it should allow you to go from just static to dynamic to interactive easily without, you know, any complex overhead, without actually to fight with it, like, basically put it this way, right? I'm terrible at explaining the points here. So I actually would recommend reading both of those articles because there's valid points in both of them. Again, I am more on the side of Rich Harris here, and I think that the current direction is pretty good one. Like, yes, there are flaws, obviously. Yes, there are issues. Yes, there are untackled areas in there, but we're getting there. And I don't think I've ever been happier with web development in my career than in 2020, essentially, with all the frameworks. So anyway, both are great articles. Go and read them. I think everyone should spend, I don't know, 10 minutes to read each one of them and try to figure out their point of view. But I would be very curious to see how both of those articles live up to whatever they outline as a conclusion in, I don't know, 5 to 10 years, I guess. We'll be very curious to see where we get from here. All right, let me have a look at the chat. Hey Marco, welcome to the stream. Hey James, welcome. Hi Amine, welcome to the stream. All right, continuing, we got tips, tricks, and bit-sized awesomeness. We do have quite a few things here today. The first one being a thing I did not know about myself. So apparently if you use Chrome DevTools and you go to the network tab and you see a network request, there is a very powerful copy menu that allows you to copy that request as fetch or a node fetch or curl or yeah, it's basically anything you can imagine that could be helpful in debugging it, which is kind of awesome because I usually tend to, assemble that myself, which is just a pain in the ass. And turns out you could just run a copy from the DevTools to get that, which is kind of awesome. So if you did not know that, do check it out. It's a really handy thing. And it also includes like cookies and everything. So you can literally replay the request, which is kind of great. Right, the next thing we got here is the, today I learned about the datalist HTML element useful for adding input suggestions with zero JavaScript. That is a thing I did not know existed. And yeah, it's literally an input with like suggestions type ahead, and it's just an HTML element, and I did not know that existed. So if you did not know as well, do check out the tweet. There is a link here that basically explains how that works. And yeah, it seems to be quite handy. All right. Next thing we got here is NPM v7 series introduction. So it's a blog post from NPM team, and it talks about the upcoming NPM version 7 and what kind of features is it gonna include. There is a whole ton of different things. So they're splitting it into separate packages like Arborist that will manage the do the tree management and do the analysis and basically all the heavy lifting in NPM. And then there's basically they're adding the workspaces, the same feature that Yarn has. They will be installing peer dependencies automatically, which I guess makes a lot of sense because it's kind of annoying that you have to do it manually every time anyway. And yeah, there's a bunch of other things that are going to change. So if you are curious, do check it out. It's a pretty good write-up on what is coming to the NPM v7. I'm quite excited about that. I mean, NPM has been getting a lot better lately. Still use Yarn in VSL, mostly because for some reason it is faster inside of VSL than NPM. I don't know why, but cannot wait for VSL 2 to land so that I can actually use NPM because, whatever, it's like NPM is good enough now, so why would I install Yarn? But nonetheless, yeah, I guess once it gets the workspaces and everything else, maybe that will make Yarn obsolete. I'm not sure. And also the Arborist seems to be like complete rewrite of all the heavy lifting that NPM does behind the sort of in the backend, right? And maybe this will make it more stable, faster, and so on and so forth. Also interesting, they've added the handling for Yarn log files so that you can actually, yeah, so it's like, it's kind of seems like they're converging, but anyhow, Yarn for me is still faster, especially when doing install. Yes, Yarn is still a bit faster. So like, as I said, I see noticeably that Yarn is faster when I'm running on VSL 1 under Windows, but this is purely to VSL 1 issues, I guess. When I'm using it on MacBook, NPM and Yarn, I guess there's like a few seconds difference, but it's not as significant anymore as it was before. But yeah, maybe it's just my use case because the projects I typically work on don't tend to be too big, so we don't usually have like a lot of dependencies. But anyway. Okay, continuing, we got aspect ratio just landed in Chrome Canary. So that's a new way to specify the size of the elements. You can say that, before you used to just say like, hey, the padding top is 56.25%, which would relate to aspect ratio being 16:9. Now you can just specify aspect ratio, which is pretty damn cool, to be honest. So I wonder if it's actually like the spec or something, or is it just another like Chrome experiment? But that does look like a really cool feature. I always use Yarn on Linux because it's 10 seconds faster. I guess, is it 10 seconds or 10x? But yeah, I'm using Mac and every time I install Yarn, sometimes it's just twice as fast. Interesting. I mean, Yarn used to be a lot faster before NPM 6 something, but with the latest versions of NPM, it's no longer that noticeable. But anyway, continuing, we got another article from the V8 dev team. It's called Up to 4 GB of Memory in WebAssembly. I already talked about that, I think, in the last V8 version release announcement last week. But this is essentially a write-up as to why was the WebAssembly memory expanded to 4 gigs just now, and what exactly was done to expand it to this size. And yeah, it is like, you would think that just expanding allowed memory for WebAssembly is a straight up task, right? But no. It actually takes a lot of time and a lot of work to just allow WebAssembly to work with like 4 gigs of RAM, which is bonkers. But anyway, it's a really great write-up as usual. It's short-ish. This is why I put it in tips and tricks. But, you know, if you're interested in the inner workings of V8 and WebAssembly, do give a read through. Again, not just WebAssembly in this case, not just V8, but Emscripten as well, because they had to modify the toolchain to allow for this, which is kind of bonkers. But yeah, let me have a look at the chat. Padding top aspect ratio trick doesn't work with the max width. I mean, obviously there's limitations, and hoping the aspect ratio would actually work with, well, every other combination you can imagine. I think this is kind of the point of it. Hey, Everlasty, oh God, how do you read your username? Everlasties? I guess Everlasties, right? Hello, Everlasties, welcome to the stream. Anyhow, the last thing we got in tips, tricks, and bit-sized awesomeness is the write-up that is essentially explains what happens when you call console.log in the V8, be it Node.js or Chrome, right? And if you ever wanted to dive into a function as simple as console.log, do check this one out. It is very C-heavy, but it does a very good job of explaining what exactly happens and how many functions are called just to display your log, be it in stdio or in the console log, which is like, oh boy. It is, you know, not as simple as you might imagine. So just do check it out if you're curious. Could Yarn be faster than NPM on slower machine, like 2015 low-grade type or stuff? Yeah, that sounds like a viable thing. So it might as well. Oh God! Oh come on! No. Oh God! I need some block. Goodbye. What is this spam? Can I like? Am I at the stage where I have to add anti-spam bots to my Twitch? Like, come on! Oh come on! Drop ES and you get it right. Everlast. Okay. Sure, that's a lot easier. My MacBook Pro is 2013, so maybe. Oh, okay. So my MacBook Pro is also 13, I think, but I have an SSD and I have like a lot of RAM, so maybe it's just the hardware thing. So it might be, yeah, Yarn might be faster on like the hard drives, maybe, and maybe the lower RAM requirements or something like this. But anyway. Okay, so now we are, I should ban those people from my Twitch. Okay, you know what? I'm going to do that. No. I'm going to do that later on. I just need to remember about that. Anyhow, coming to the releases section, we got 4 of them here today. The first one, big one, being Deno version 1.0. Deno 1.0 is here. It is finally released. It is not yet production ready, as the Deno team says. But it now has a stable API, so it's pretty safe to start experimenting with it and building tools on top of it. But, you know, be very careful about putting that into production. The best description of what Deno is, I think, is this header they have here, which says that Deno is a web browser for command line scripts, which I think is a perfect description that encompasses basically everything that Deno does. So it's a runtime, and it basically follows the same philosophy that the browser does. It allows you to import modules from URLs. It allows you to sandbox stuff by allowing it explicitly, and so on and so forth. There's a ton more information here as to, you know, what the 1.0 has and what kind of plans they have for future. So if you're curious, do check the release notes out. It is very, very interesting. Let me have a look at the chat. Yarn, my understanding is caching NPM packages maybe when doing second time install faster than NPM. NPM also caches installs, so when you do NPM install second time, it should hit the cache as well, so that's not the problem. I got 64 gigs of RAM and SSD, and Yarn is just faster. Okay, I like honestly I don't know. Like it's just in my experience, Yarn is not by like it's still a bit faster than npm, but not by much. I don't know. Anyway, let's not argue about this anymore. You can run some tests and see if the latest versions are, adapt. I mean, again, I will be very curious to see if npm 7 will finally get on par with it in all configs. I'm guessing the difference might be purely down to the hardware setups. So it's like on some hardware it might be faster, on some hardware it might be more or less the same. npm is still definitely a bit slower for me, but not by a significant margin. This is why I'm using it in most of the projects now, and just without thinking too much, aside again from VSL when it just bottlenecks. Anyway, the next release of the day, or of the week, I guess, is Next.js version 9.4, with the coolest feature here being fast refresh. So that new React fast refresh is now added to Next, and you can try it out, and it's mind-blowingly awesome. It literally allows you to refresh your components without losing state, and it is really fast, and it is quite awesome. Again, it requires your components to use hooks, won't work with classes, but when it does work, it is really damn impressive. What else is there? I mean, so the built-in fetch support is a welcome feature. You no longer need to add node fetch or isomorphic fetch or whatever. They just include the fetch polyfill by default, which works amazingly well. Yeah, and there's a bunch of other improvements, so if you're curious, to check it out. Like Next.js basically continues to be one of the best React frameworks out there, and my first pick for basically building any SSR website. Okay. Next thing we got here is TypeScript version 3.9 with, well, as you know, I'm not exactly a TypeScript user, so I cannot say too much about it, but I will say that one of the features is I'm really happy to see here is the CommonJS auto imports, because this is going to be powering VS Code's CommonJS auto imports, which will basically allow me to import stuff in Node.js without relying on ES modules, which is great. I love that TypeScript also keeps improving the JavaScript development experience just by basically existing, which is kind of awesome. If you're curious about what other changes was there, do check out these release notes. There seems to be quite a few things related to like inference and promise all, and editor improvements, and TS expect error comments, and so on and so forth. Okay. And the last release we got here for today is quicklink version 2.0, which is, I think we covered it last year or something, maybe even before that. So quicklink is the prefetch library that allows you to automatically prefetch the links whenever the user hovers over them, essentially. And it's less than 1 kilobyte, and the version 2.0 is out, which makes it even smaller. It now allows you to prefetch React router routes, and there's basically additional configs such as set limits on total requests, set limits on simultaneous requests, and so on and so forth. So if you're working with complex websites and you want some prefetching, do check this one out. It's actually pretty damn good. Right, that is it for releases. Now we're coming to the libraries and demos. We do have quite a few of them today. Let me just open all of that. The first one being pose-animator. So this is a pretty nice example of how you can use TensorFlow.js to translate your webcam and your face, or your pose, I guess, because it also tracks the hands and so on and so forth, to an existing image, and essentially create live animations. And all of that works in a browser, which is kind of damn cool. So if you're curious how to do something like this in TensorFlow, do check this one out. Next thing we got here is fullpage-react-fs, which is a lightweight React library to create full-page websites. So essentially allows you to create these websites that have the full-page sections, and when you just scroll through them, nothing super fancy here, but if you were looking for something like this, do check it out. Yarn 27 seconds, npm 45 seconds. That is quite a difference. As I've said, in my cases, it was usually a difference of like a couple of seconds, so I'm not sure why. But anyhow. Next library we got here is bepis, write components concisely. So it's essentially a component framework, I guess, that uses this kind of, so it basically uses template literals for templating the components, and then you can just use the variables inside this template literals, and then it has some sort of a template language that looks kind of like, I'm not even sure what it looks like. But yeah, it's a template language, so there you go. Okay, Continuing, we got node-casbin, an authorization library that supports access control models like ACL, RBAC, ABAC in Node.js. So if you were looking for the access control in your app and you wanted to do it in, well, just about any language really, this one is actually really, really good. Really easy to set up, really simple config, and allows you to do just any policy you might imagine. They have a really cool, pretty helpful website that basically lists supported models with examples. They have an editor for models where you can edit your model, your policy, and then test if any of the requests you wanted to work. And they also have a ton of different things like the what was it? The adapters for models. So you can like save your models to database if you want to, Postgres, MongoDB, whatever the hell you imagine. All of them are here. It's a really, really nice tool, and I think I don't remember. Someone shared it on our Discord asking if anyone used it. I picked it up there, and we started using it in our current project almost immediately because it does exactly what it says, and it's pretty great to use. Right, next thing we got here is a theme-ui-sketchy, a sketchy theme UI presets. Basically what it says, I just thought it looks really cool, so I thought I would share it. I just love this theme. I think this looks really good. So if you want sketchy form elements, buttons, links, alerts, whatever, this looks really cool. Do check this one out. Next thing we got here is oauth, which is an oauth 2.0 implementation for various providers in one place. Essentially a project that shows you how to implement oauth for, well, most of the popular providers such as Facebook, Google, Instagram, Reddit, Discord, GitHub, whatever you can imagine. Most of them are here basically. And yeah, all of that in one app that shows off how to do that. The project structure is not the most simple one to figure out. Like there is some, it almost feels like a Java project to me, honestly, because there's so many folders. But essentially, if you go to source modules, user mutations, authorize, this is where you find the actual implementations for oauth. It took me like 5 minutes to find that stuff, but the implementations themselves are actually pretty good, and you know they use. So this doesn't actually use any third-party packages for implementing that. It is purely request-based, so you can actually see on a very low level how to do oauth and how to use the tokens and so on and so forth, which is pretty good. But yeah, the folder structure could be a lot simpler. Anyway, pretty nice learning material for on how to actually implement oauth. All right, next thing we got here is webperf-psi. So this is the command line tool that allows you to, or I guess, wait, is it a command line tool or is it? Yes, it is a command line tool, and just a command line tool. Okay, for some reason I thought it was the module as well. So it's a command line tool that allows you to query the page speed insights API to get this performance metrics for your app and to display them. I don't know, like it's probably useful for something like CI or whatever if you want to track them. So if you were looking for something like this, do check this one out. Seems pretty handy. All right. Next thing we got here is Password Fountain, a modern and performant password manager interface which works everywhere. So yeah, it's another password manager. It's open source. You can check it out and see how it works. Again, I personally prefer Bitwarden, as you might know, but it never hurts to have more competition. All right, next thing we got here is denox or denox. I'm not sure how to read that. It's Deno script runner, so it's essentially the same thing as, you know, npm run. You can do Deno run start, for example, and it does whatever you want it to. So you define the file, you define the Deno options, and it will basically do whatever you want. Seems pretty nice. So this basically sort of taps into the whole like Deno discussion that a lot of people after the Deno was announced complained that, hey, it doesn't have proper module management, it doesn't have scripts, it doesn't have A, B, C, D, E, and this is kind of the counter argument to it, right? So the core idea behind the Deno is to follow the web standards as close as possible, right? Which is exactly why it does the module management through the URLs. And one of the counter arguments was that if we follow the web standards, the good tooling will arise around these web standards that are going to be way more ubiquitous than what the NPM and CommonJS did in the beginning, for example, right? Which I personally think is a really neat approach. Like, I don't know if it will work out. I personally feel like it will. It's obviously going to take a lot more time, as if, rather than giving the like NPM-like tool to Deno from the very start. But I personally like the URL approach a lot more. And this is the denox is one of the examples saying that, hey, we actually can build a tool on top of Deno that will do exactly what we want and still follow the same web standards paradigm. So this is a really good example of that, I think, and pretty neat tool. So if you're going to work with Deno and if you wanted some script runner, do check this one out. Maybe this is exactly what you wanted. Right, next thing we got here is VS Code real-time debugging, VS Code extensions that visualizes how a program is being executed in real time. Now this is how it looks. It literally allows you to tap into your browser and show your console logs and other things that happen inline in your editor in real time, which is pretty damn cool, to be honest. I don't know if there's any use case for this. I'm not sure, honestly, but an ability to see the console logs in your editor in real time when you are running something in the browser sounds like a pretty neat feature. Now there's obviously caveats, so it only works if you can run the default VS Code debugging, right? And it only works with console log, and it only works with the browser. So there's like kind of a limitations, but it's a really cool POC. So if you're curious, do check this one out. It seems like a really neat thing. Right, next thing we got here is Recoil, a state management library for React. Yes, another state management library, but there is a few things here. So first of all, this is from Facebook open source. So this is, I mean, I wouldn't say official Facebook state management, but this is a state management library published by Facebook. Now, if you look at the getting started section, it looks a lot like, say, unstated next, where you create a context, right? And then you create this sort of state. In this case, they call them atoms. And then you consume those atoms using hooks. Sounds straightforward, right? Again, why would you need that if you have unstated? Or, if you can just use context? Well, the thing is that this state management library goes quite beyond just passing around the state, because yes, you could really just do that with context. And it actually tackles a lot of challenges here. One of them being, for example, it already supports compatibility with concurrent mode and the other features of React that might become available soon. So this is something that I think no other state management library can offer, because, well, this is developed by Facebook, so those guys probably know what is going on with React. They probably working closely with the React team. Maybe this is even released by React team itself. I haven't actually checked who the authors are, but the fact that they basically say, hey, we're going to be supporting all the future features, including concurrent mode, which is I assume is a pretty big thing, is pretty cool. And yeah, so obviously boilerplate free API, which is, again, something, it looks exactly like what you would do if you would use context for global state management. And other things include, so the state definitions is incrementally distributed, which means that you can actually do code splitting here, which is, I don't think, actually something you could do with stuff like unstated. So this just won't fly, right? And then, yeah, so obviously like server-side rendering and all that kind of stuff. It's really interesting. Like, you would think that something as simple as a state management is already a solved problem, right? But when you start thinking about things like SSR, like bundle splitting, like concurrent mode, suspends, and all the other billion features that React might have at some point, it suddenly becomes extremely complex. And at first, when I saw this library, I was like, oh god, another library for, like, state management library for React. Then I noticed it was Facebook and started reading more into it. Again, it's probably my fault. I should have been reading more into it from the very beginning, but hey, it's kind of like, so first of all, this marked as experimental, right? And they say it explicitly, like, as experimental state management, so be careful about using that. It is MIT licensed, which is also cool. And I'm wondering if basically, if this is successful, whether they will add it to the React itself or publish it as a part of React that could be tree shaken, I guess. Because this is literally one of the features that you almost always need in React. Like, you almost always need some sort of a global state management if you're building anything that is more or less complex. And, well, I mean, if you're not, then why the hell do you need React? And this is literally one of the things that is missing from React right now. Like, Xstate is still great. Xstate is still has its uses, but you don't always need it. Like, it's also a very complex thing, right? Xstate has a very specific use case where you have a very complex large tree of states that should be switching from one thing to another, and you need this very complex state machine representation that you can easily split and track, right? This is somewhere in between the just simple state management and Xstate, Redux, and other solutions. So I would put Xstate and Redux on the same level of complexity, right? Because it's a great thing. It's a lot easier than Redux and a lot nicer to work with, but it's still very complex. And you not always need it. Like, sometimes you just need this global state that you pass around with, like, I don't know, one value or array or object or whatever, right? And you just want to consume with one simple hook. In this case, Xstate is overkill. But using context might not always work as well, because you might want to have concurrency support or suspense support or bundle splitting. And in this case, this library comes in. And yeah, so I'm kind of curious if they will, like, if they end up integrating that into React itself. Probably not, I'm guessing, but I would be very interested to see where this experiment goes, essentially. So is there an integrity check for Deno URL modules? Well, what do you like? So again, Deno here follows the browser approach. Is there integrity check for browser imports? Like, yes, you can. So in the browser, if you import something, you can give the, what was it? Wait a second. Browser, HTTPS. No, wait, AS module. There was the, what do you call it? Hash check. There was basically a mechanism for checking the imports by setting, what was it? Oh, where did I see it? I think CDN.js had it or something. So if we say jQuery, and yes, there you go. So you got this script tag with no, god damn it. Why am I doing this? Was it? There you go. Script tag. Yes, so you got this integrity check with SHA. This is, I'm assuming, this is the web standard, right? So I'm assuming the Deno also has a way to do that if you want to. Haven't checked, actually. That's a pretty good question, but I assume it probably has. But yeah, there's an integrity. Yeah, there you go. So it follows the web standards almost to the letter, which is kind of cool. Anyway, continuing, we got temporary files and dirs for Node.js. So if you ever wanted to make temporary files and dirs, and I mean, I usually do it myself, but you know, it's a bit of a pain, and especially if you want to be cross-platform and everything, this seems like a quite nice solution. So if you were looking for something like this, do check this one out. Next thing we got here is VR DOS, virtual reality DOS emulator, that is also built in TypeScript. So it's actually a complete web version, and you can use it. Well, first of all, you can use it on PC by just using mouse and keyboard, and it actually works perfectly well. If it loads, come on, there we go. So you can actually navigate, and what are you doing? Stop moving. There we go. So it actually boots up the DOS, and yes, you can literally use it, and it's a full-on DOS here. But the cool thing is that it actually supports VR. So if you have something like Oculus Quest or, you know, any other headset, you can just fire up a browser, navigate there, and you will be in a full VR environment, and it will allow you to use your controllers as basically things to navigate the DOS environment, which is just bonkers. Yeah, so I guess, you know, if you wanted to play around with it, or maybe if you wanted to build your own VR experience in web, do check this one out. It's actually pretty damn cool. Right, next thing we got here is Ska-Svg, I guess is how you read that, or maybe Ska-Svg, I'm not sure. It's basically a tiny library that allows you to use SVG shapes in your web page in the easiest way. You just import that library, it's a tiny JavaScript, and then you can assign that data Ska object with given parameter object name to the div, which will render that div as a shape of, well, some SVG. There's like a ton of shapes here for picking. You can use that as the header, as they do over here, or as inline thing, or whatever the hell you imagine. Obviously customizable and everything, so seems like quite a handy thing. So if you are looking for something like this, do check this one out. Right, next thing we got here is React Pixi. Like, this one is really neat. I'm not sure why I haven't seen that before. It's already at version 2.0. This is a Pixi renderer for React. So it basically allows you to, or I guess renderer is a wrong way to put it, but it basically allows you to create Pixi scenes by just writing React components, which is really, really cool. So essentially it's a declarative way to write Pixi.js. And yeah, so it's, I think my, yes, scripts blocker is just blocking all the examples, but you can do things like this. You know, there's a Pixi example running and you can use hooks for stuff, and they even provide the use tick hook, which basically allows you to do that. And this is modifiable, by the way, so you can just, you know, try and tweak it and see what happens, which is also kind of cool. So there you go, and it just fallen away somewhere. It looks amazing, to be honest. So if you were looking into doing some nice animations with Pixi.js in React, then this might be a really good way of doing that. Right, and the last thing we have here for today is Tracer, a powerful and customizable logging library for Node.js. This is yet another logging library that has quite a few pretty neat methods. So if you were looking for some logging here, do check this one out. I personally really like things like, where was it? Yes, like for example, specifying that this logger is a daily file, so it actually rotate the file automatically and then clean up if you have the more than 10 logs, for example, in this case, which is kind of great. So it's like, you know, if you're looking for complex logger, do check this one out. It supports different transports, including MongoDB, streaming, whatever the hell you can imagine. Basically, you can use multiple transports. You can define helpers, and seems really damn powerful. So yeah, if that sounds interesting, do check this one out. Right, that's it for the libs and demos. And the last thing we got here for today is interesting and silly stuff. And it's titled "Why We at $Famous Companies Switch to $Hyped Technology." And this is possibly the best comedy piece I've seen about different companies describing as to why they switched to new hyped technology, which is like, sometimes you get those articles that are really good and really insightful, but majority of them tend to be pretty much like this one, which is like, oh my god. But it's hilarious. So if you ever read articles like this, do read this one. It is just gold mine, basically. Right. That's it from my side. So if you guys have any questions, suggestions, or things you want to discuss with regards to today's episode, or maybe your libraries you want to share, do throw them into the chat right now. If not, we can wrap it up here. As usual, you can find all the links I've mentioned on GitHub or on bxjs.dev. You can follow me on YouTube, Twitch, Mixer, Twitter for updates. You can listen to this in a podcast form on Anchor FM or iTunes or whatever. I think it's even on Spotify now. If you want to, you can join our Discord server if you want to discuss any of that and chat after stream. The Reddit still exists. I don't think I've used it. DevTools still exists. I don't think I use it anymore as well. Facebook also. I probably should remove all of that. You can send me an email if you want to. And yeah, that's basically all I have to say. Oh yeah. We also have a Telegram channel with unfiltered news I collect over the week if you're curious to see all the kind of garbage I get over the week. And, you know, most of it actually gets thrown out. So there's like, I obviously try to not collect like the completely terrible stuff, but it happens. And yeah, if you're just curious to see what kind of things I collect over the week, you can follow it there. And that's basically it. Right, doesn't seem like we have any more questions or suggestions. So as usual, thank you guys very much for watching. Thank you for your continued support. I hope you enjoyed the podcast. Have an awesome rest of the weekend or rest of the week if you're watching the VOD of this. And I see you on Wednesday for the next live stream.